Welcome, everybody, to Chronicles of a Dallas County Democrat. I am your host, AZ Zion. In this podcast, we interview local activists and ask them how they got to where they are today. And in today's episode, we have environmental justice activist Esme Zuniga. Esme, say hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Glad you can make it here, Esme. Thank you for coming on. So we found out about each other through our work at Downwinders at Risk. You work for them and I volunteer for them. And also I should mention that I feel like my podcast is slowly trending into the climate justice or environmental activism space.
Yeah.
I don't intend it to be that way, but that is my number one, I guess, hobby horse when it comes to activism. First of all, tell the audience who is Downwinders at Risk, what they do, and how you found out about them, how you got to work for them.
So Downwinders at Risk is an environmental justice organization, and they've been around for 30 years. And our focus is, we believe in a theory of change. We believe that communities should have the right to self-determine how they want their community to grow and what they want in it. We focus a lot on Black and Brown communities that have historically been undergone injustice with the industrial zoning, and they found that a lot of these industry structures are primarily in communities that used to be redlined. So historically racist communities. So that's what we focus on. It's a different type of organizing structure because we go into community organizations and help them. We support them with things that they might need. We help them with organizing and help them to really shore up their structure. And
Awesome.
So that's what we do.
Awesome. And were you always an environmental justice activist?
I've always been an advocate for environmental justice. I've done community organizing in the past. I've been doing it off and on for about 30 years. I organized in colonias for street lights, for paved streets, getting rid of more active participation by sheriff's offices in shutting down stash houses. And that was all work that I did in the Rio Grande Valley. And I skipped over it, but a colonia is an unincorporated area that primarily exists in the Rio Grande Valley, which are the four most southern counties in the state of Texas. And the big policy, the big cash crop was citrus. And in 1984, I believe, there was a huge freeze. And a lot of farmers lost their crops and they sold their properties to developers. This is an unincorporated area in the county zone, and counties don't have zoning restrictions or building codes. They might now, but at the time they didn't. Developers basically cut up plots of land and sold them, but they didn't put infrastructure in it. So there's no streets, no drainage, no light, no water. So people were living in substandard housing because it was like the Wild West. So one of the things that we did is after one of the hurricanes, several of our neighborhoods were extremely flooded. So we fought and won a $5 million drainage project. So that way, not only were we able to get money to fix the houses, but the drainage project made it so that way we didn't have to go through that process again. So there wouldn't be follow-up damage.
So I take it you grew up in the Rio Grande Valley?
I did. I'm originally from San Juan, Texas. And my family wasn't, they're staunch Democrats, but they were never really openly political. My grandfather and my grandmother raised me, and my grandfather had a business that worked with the county and TxDOT and stuff like that. So he was always very quiet about his politics. So he would tell us at home, but he wouldn't advertise it because he didn't want to offend business and lose business because of that. So I was the outspoken political one.
Did your grandparents emigrate from Mexico to the U.S.? Was it
I
your grandparents?
No. So my grandmother's family, I think she's like fifth or sixth generation, and her great 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 grandmother, I think, was indigenous from Coahuila, Mexico, and my grandfather, I don't know if it was his fifth or sixth generation relative, is from Zacatecas, and they're indigenous there. And then on my father's side, my grandfather's family immigrated a generation after my grandfather's family from the Zacatecas area.
That is a rich and deep history. You're more American than a lot of Americans I know.
Yeah.
That's great.
But I still have
That's
to
awesome.
carry my birth certificate and social security card until my passport comes in.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, they got this whole Bad Bunny thing. Bad Bunny's from Puerto Rico, which
I
is America.
know. Oh,
I don't want to get into this rabbit hole. I mean, we could if we want, but it's mind-boggling to hear like a family history like yours and saying I don't understand why this is not part of the American fabric. Like we're
yeah.
all immigrants.
Yeah. Our contributions have been downplayed. They have been written out of history. Um, I come from a very military family on both sides, and I still have an uncle that is at the bottom of Pearl Harbor. So my family's been in the military since World War One, and um, it's disturbing. I have family right now that are veterans that they're like, I don't even know what I fought for with the state of the country being where it is. They're like, this is ridiculous. And as outraged as I am, I really feel for our veterans because, many of them died, many of them got injured. I have family that is permanently disabled from the military, and I hate that they're having to question, like, what did we serve for? It
Hmm. Yeah.
it makes me very angry.
Yeah. So not only do you have a long and rich history of being in America, you have a long and rich history of civic engagement, right? You mentioned your grandparents, serving in the war and, Pearl Harbor and what have you. That's insane. Was it your grandparents that got you into civic engagement? How did that first start with you?
Um, my journey to civic engagement started early on because my family was also very active in the Catholic Church. And so service to the church was encouraged. Um, During my confirmation, I had to do community service. And that got me focused on how fortunate I was that, I grew up in an upper middle class family. Um, Even though my grandfather was labor because he moved houses. So even though it was hard labor, I mean, he still made really good money and, had us in an area where we could afford better things. He didn't buy them. That's how people keep money is they don't spend it. So that was my grandfather. And I always noticed how he took care of his workers. If a summer was particularly good, he'd rent a fishing boat and take them off, deep sea fishing at Padre. Holidays, he always gave them turkeys and hams, paid them for the holiday. Um, that got me into like workers' rights because when I started working officially, because I've technically been working since I was 12, but when I got my first real job, um, I was surprised that employers didn't treat their employees as well as my grandfather treated his employees. So that got me wondering, like, what's going on? Um, and I protested the first war in Afghanistan, the first war in Iraq. Sorry, the first war in Iraq. I protested because my algebra teacher was in the National Guard and he got deployed. Got in trouble for that. Got in trouble in junior high for leading a walkout with my friends because, we didn't understand that nobody was going to be paying attention to us. But we had a walkout in opposition to apartheid. And so that's how I started. My grandparents supported my engagement. Um, and my grandfather, the thing that struck me the most is that I was probably like 12 when my grandfather sat me down and he told me, whatever path you take in life, always remember you have to work twice as hard to be considered half as good because you're a woman. And because you're a minority, you have to work 4 times as hard to be considered half as good as the average white person. So that really struck me. And I I started fighting for like women's rights and, equal pay and things like that, and signing petitions and going to protests. And, and they supported that. My grandfather was very like, you fight for your people, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like your family had your back when it came to activism. A lot of people, don't have the family support, right?
Yeah.
And which is why a lot of people don't vote or don't do much of anything. So
Yeah.
I love that. Did you, so you go through high school. Did you have aspirations to be an activist, to work full time in this space? What did you do after high school?
So I went to college kind of not knowing what I wanted to do. Um, and then it wasn't until I got out of college that I became more political. Um, so college, I was trying to figure stuff out, and I graduated, and my dad was like, "Come," well, my grandfather, he was like, "Come home, be a teacher." So I did. I lasted a year, and that was when Move On was real popular, and they were having the meetups, and it was during the Carrie Edwards campaign, and so that's how I first got involved. And I volunteered at the Democratic Party. And at the end of my year of teaching, like around spring break, I started volunteering when I had a chance. And then during summer, I started volunteering at the headquarters full time. That was the Hidalgo County Democratic headquarters. And middle of summer, they offered me a job as communications director, and I said, okay. And I quit teaching. I was like, I'm pulling my contract. I'm not coming back.
That's awesome. Well, from one county party employee to another, hello and thank
Hello.
you. Uh, but I came pretty late into the game, well into my adulthood. It sounds like you started pretty young. So this was
Yeah.
during the Kerry Edwards campaign in '04.
Yeah, I was about 25 maybe.
Yeah, that's
So,
great. Already as a communications director.
yeah. And
So
then after a while I got promoted to assistant executive director. And we got a new communications director, and you never knew what was going to happen from a day-to-day basis.
And it must be tough. I mean, if for those that are outside of Texas, they may automatically assume that Hispanics vote Democrat
Mhm.
straight off the bat, right? And Rio Grande Valley, borders Mexico, largely Hispanic, right?
Mhm.
But that's not necessarily the case, as we saw again last year, when there was much more Hispanics voting Trump than for Harris.
Yeah.
What were some of the challenges, being a communications director for the Hidalgo County Democrats, and what were some of the accomplishments and challenges you had?
I think that one of the biggest challenges that I had was everybody wanted to come out to events, but it wouldn't translate into voting. And that was difficult. It was also difficult. So even now to this day, one of the things I do is when I would prepare a statement, like a press release, I would start off with like a brain dump. and just complain and be like, this is why we're doing this. And then I would go back and delete it. And then I would write, like, the Hidalgo County Democratic Party chair, has come out with a statement today about, whatever. And at that time, the big thing was the Minutemen that were patrolling the border, because as usual, immigration is always a big thing. And so that was hard. And another difficulty that I had is that my boss, the chair, he was more radical. And so it was trying to contain him and be like, well, we really shouldn't do that. Like we might attract the wrong attention. Not that he listened to me, but that was the hardest part when I was doing communication.
And now we can't even get Democrats to agree on things progressives want. So what happened? Like, how did that kind of 180-degree turn?
So I think at least in the Rio Grande Valley, like a lot of people, like Paula Ramos, who is a correspondent for MSNBC, wrote a book, and she was talking about how a lot of Latinos think, oh, well, Trump's not talking about me. And they've kind of fooled themselves into thinking that because they're Republican, that the Republican Party isn't against them. But what they don't understand is that the current Republican Party is basically the KKK, and they are talking about us, you know. And I think the reason that the Rio Grande Valley skewed Republican this last election is because even when I was working for the party, which was back in the early 2000s, we were ignored by both the national and the state party and used basically as an ATM. So, the Clintons would come in, Obama came in, everybody would come in and raise, millions of dollars from the few wealthy people in the valley and move on. And we never saw effects of what was going on, of government policy. And so I think a lot of people, like, they don't understand that the national elections do affect us. Of course they do. But all politics is local. And we're in the crappy situation that we're in now because we have been under Republican governors forever. George Bush, Rick Perry, and Abbott. And it's like each one was worse than the other. Like Bush wasn't a very great governor, but Perry was terrible. And then Abbott, I mean, it's like, dude, the ramps at the Capitol are for you. You were basically a DEI hire, and you don't want to give us the same rights? I'm disabled too, I have epilepsy, but I'm not going to say, oh yes, I got hired because I'm a woman and I have epilepsy. No, I mean, every job I've gotten, it's because I work really hard. And that's one thing, I read an article today where a man was talking about how he can't find any workers and how he was harassed by ICE because he lives in San Antonio, but he's originally from the Rio Grande Valley. And in the Rio Grande Valley, you can live your entire life without speaking English. Everybody knows Spanish pretty much. And they were giving him a hard time because he had an accent, and they were like, oh, well, if you were born in the US, how come you don't speak English very well? And I'm like, well, English is a second language in the Valley. Like, and that was hard because I started school in the 70s, and like in school, I was made to wear a dunce cap. I was sat in the corner with my nose touching the wall for speaking Spanish. I was swatted, on my hands for speaking Spanish, forced to sit on my hand because I was left-handed, and they switched me to being right-handed. And so the 70s were a wild time. So there was discrimination even in the schools. And the Valley, which is primarily Latino, I mean, we didn't have a mayor that was Latino until the 70s. I think it was 78. And that was my former boss, who was the chair of the Democratic Party. He was a first Latino mayor in the Rio Grande Valley. So
Wow.
it's crazy. It's real crazy. The valley is a different
Hmm.
beast.
It is. It is. And you hit on so many points. What I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Esme. So I hear kind of two possible reasons that Hispanics either don't vote or vote Republican. One is the Democrats are not there,
Yeah.
right? You mentioned Democratic presidents and Democratic politicians coming into
Hmm.
RGV, and fundraising and then, airplaning their way out of there. The other reason is Hispanics wanting to kind of make themselves look and sound like Republicans because they think, that they're going to curry favors with the party and the Republicans are not after them. How much weight do you give to either of these?
The vast amount of weight that I give is the fact that the Republican Party has paid more attention to people in the Valley than the Democratic Party. And part of that reason has been because the Rio Grande Valley was heavy Democratic. So the Republicans always had to work hard. And they made inroads because the last national party chair from the DNC to go to the Rio Grande Valley and not ask for money was Howard Dean, and that was because I got him there. So this was like 2005, maybe 2006. I went to Democracy Fest in Austin, where Howard Dean was speaking, and I managed to get a one-on-one meeting with him, and I asked him, would you consider coming down to the Rio Grande Valley and, for a rally? And he said yes. So then that started talks with the DNC once I got back to the Valley. And, he came and he did a presentation, and it was good. Excuse me. There was a lot of excitement, and, people from the Valley were like, finally, the Democratic Party's paying attention to us. And it's really the same thing that you've heard from Black voters. The Democratic Party takes us for granted. They're like, oh, they vote Democrat, so I don't have to worry about them. Like, that's my biggest problem with the fact that they don't truly campaign in all 50 states when they're running for president. They hit the purple and the swing states, and that's great, but you shouldn't take every voter for granted just because they're in a Democratic area. Because what that causes is apathy. People don't want to vote. So when I was organizing in the Valley, um, one of the things that I did was I explained voting to the community like this. I said, look, being a politician is a job. Who wants to get fired from their job? Nobody. If you go to your city rep or your county rep and you say, my neighborhood, my precinct has this problem. There's potholes everywhere, trees are falling, nobody does anything, like it's a disaster. The very first thing that politician is going to do is ask their assistant, what precinct are they from, and what is the voter turnout?
Hmm.
If you have 100 people registered to vote and only 15 of them come out and vote during an election, they're not going to listen to you at all.
Hmm.
They might give you lip service, but that's it. If I live in a wealthy neighborhood that has 100 people registered to vote and 75, 80 of them come out and vote every election, if I go in and say, you know what, it would really be nice if there was a chocolate fountain in our park, they're going to install it by the next week. As absurd as it is, and I use that example because as absurd as it is, it's true. If you don't have large voter turnout or you're not a large donor, they're not going to pay attention to you. I would tell people, okay, you don't agree with the Republicans or the Democrats? Do a write-in. Write in yourself. Write in Mickey Mouse. I don't care who you vote for. As long as you show up, nobody knows who you voted for. As long as you show up and it says that you voted, that's all that matters. That's all that
Yeah.
matters, because then people will listen to you. And I mean, it's a numbers game. It's always been a numbers game, you know.
Yeah.
Um, it's frustrating, but I think, the apathy stems from the Democrats taking advantage of, Latinos in the Rio Grande Valley. And I think that's probably 75% of it.
Yeah, yeah. So many points you hit on. Two big ones. One, I think people nowadays, yeah, I don't know about nowadays, but definitely as of a few years ago, used to make fun of Howard Dean for his "bia" and
Yeah,
whatever, right? The thing about Howard Dean, I mean, to me, correct me if I'm wrong here, Esme, please, I want some feedback. He was a revolutionary
yeah,
for his time, campaigning in all 50 states, being that, sort of progressive, that energetic voice within the Democratic Party, while we
yeah,
had a person who was not probably as energetic as he was. So I think he had a vision for how the Democratic Party should operate, but it just never really came through, and then he was
yeah.
gone a few years later.
And don't get me wrong, like I'm a lifelong Democrat. But I think one of the problems with the Democratic Party is that we play by the rule. Politics is a down dirty fight. And while Republicans are going in there like MMA style, we're like, what are the rules? What are we allowed to do? Maybe we shouldn't talk like that or name call because, that's not polite and people aren't going to like that. People don't like losing their health insurance. People don't like having to go to the food bank because they don't have money or food stamps to get food for themselves and their children. You know, I'm on a lot of medication and there was times when I couldn't afford my epilepsy medication because I had to pay my rent, I had to pay the light, like might not have as much money to buy groceries because I had to decide, do I want to pay $90 for my epilepsy medication or do I want to buy a gallon of milk and some eggs? And that's never a problem that anybody in the US should have. This concept that the Republicans have that healthcare for all is socialism is a load of crap. We are the only industrialized nation that does not have some form of national healthcare. Canada has it, Britain has it, Spain, Ireland, like even Mexico has a form of nationalized healthcare. And, being from the Rio Grande Valley, I mean, I grew up going to doctors and dentists in Mexico because we didn't have health insurance. As much money as my dad made, he was like, it's why pay for health insurance when we can go to Mexico and it pay like $20. Whereas the same kind of doctor's visit here would cost you at least $180 just for the visit. That's not including lab work, medicines, anything. I went to a doctor in Reynosa that he also had his own pharmacy. So when you visited him, you might pay $85, but you also leave with all the medications that you need for the month. And, and also here in the US, everything is a specialist. Your primary care physician doesn't treat anything. They give you a physical, and that's about it. Cold, coughs. But if you say, oh, my stomach's been hurting, oh, okay, let me send you to a specialist. Arthritis, which can be managed by a primary care physician, oh, you need a specialist. I'm like, no, I don't. So I mean, those are a lot of the issues that, that Americans really care about. And yet our politicians are like, whatever. I mean, they're still getting paid while we're having the shutdown.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and
While federal workers are getting furloughed,
yeah,
at least the
and
essential ones.
yeah, and the military's not being paid. So right now, the administration has activated National Guard in several states. They're not getting paid because we're in a shutdown. And, the GOP keeps trying to frame it as, oh, it's the Democratic shutdown. No, it is a Republican shutdown because the Democrats are fighting for health care. The Democrats finally realized that this is the only move they have, you know, and when Schumer voted to keep the government open last time, I think we're hurting more now than we would have then. And,
Agreed.
that's why when he did that, I was like, primary him. I released a list of all the Democrats who voted to keep the government open, and I put it on TikTok, and I was like, um, primary them, primary all of them, because it's ridiculous.
I was actually going to ask you a question about organizing, but you led to a great segue here. When you said primary Schumer, by the way, agreed, snap fingers, everything. Um, I asked another guest on this podcast about this, but I didn't ask her as directly as I am with you. When the Texas Democrats came back to Texas to unbreak the quorum, I suppose, do you have thoughts on that? Do you have opinions? Was that the way they should have done it? Should they have left Texas first? And if you believe they should have left Texas, should they have come back, and at what point?
I definitely believe that they should have left Texas. I think the only reason they came back is because they had worked out that deal with Newsom, where he was like, we're gonna try to get back those 5 Democratic seats that they're taking away from Texas. Um, the I think one of the things that was good is that so the Republicans did this thing like, oh, we're gonna arrest them, we're gonna send them, blah 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 blah, we're gonna pull their seats. But the one thing that the Democrats did is they stood their ground. I think they did come back at an appropriate time. Um, they proved their message and their point so that those new 5 seats that they've created, they've now made 10 seats winnable and, up for a fight in Texas for the midterms. Where they would have only had 5 seats they had to worry about. Now they have 10. Because, Crockett, they gerrymandered her out of her district. So now she's going to have to run for a new district. She's probably going to win. Like they focused on Democratic areas, but, they're doing it in areas like, for example, Lloyd Doggett.
Hmm.
I I do not appreciate the fact that Lloyd Doggett is said that he's not going to run again because of the new district. Lloyd Doggett is a statesman by every sense of the word. I admire him. I had a good relationship with him when I worked for the Democratic Party. He was the one congressman that I could count on to not let ego get in the way, to be cordial and mean it. It wasn't his staff coming at me, being like, "Oh, you need to make sure he's speaking first and blah blah blah." It was none of that. It was always like whatever he would always be like, "Whatever's easier for you. Whatever's easier for you. I don't want to cause problems." So that was really amazing. And that would be a loss if he doesn't run again. Um, but I do think that the Democrats leaving the state was effective.
All right. So you worked at the Hidalgo Democratic Party. How long did you work there?
Oh wow. I spent a year as communications director, a year and a half as the executive director, and then another year and a half as executive director. So like 3.5, 4 years.
Nice. So pretty much a full presidential election cycle.
Yeah, pretty much.
And you got Howard Dean to communicate with you guys and to come
Yeah,
down here to Texas. So that's amazing.
yeah.
That's an accomplishment in and of itself. Uh, where did you go on from after that?
After that, I um I I did a year with AmeriCorps Vista, and after my year with AmeriCorps Vista, I began officially working as a community organizer for TOP, and I was with them for about 3.5 years, 4 years. Um, I had some personal things happen where I needed to move out of state for a while. So I left and I was teaching when I was in Phoenix, but I was also a member of the Democratic Party there. I was a member of LULAC there. And part of what I did there was I can proudly say that I was one of the people who voted that Sheriff Arpeggio out of
Mm.
office. Um, Sadly, that election was when Trump won his first presidency, and um, I had gone to the convenience store because I was listening to election results come in, because election day is literally my Christmas, Halloween, Hanukkah, everything rolled into one. I am a huge nerd. Steve Kornacki is like my best friend. Because when I started working campaigns, I started as a data cruncher, because and I forgot to mention this, between me getting out of working for the party, I mean, we're doing my AmeriCorps Vista. I was a consultant for political campaigns, and I started as a data cruncher. And I think that if you're going to be in politics, you need to start as a data cruncher,
Thank
because
you.
that formulates everything. Like everything is in the data. And I I was able to call what precincts we were going to win and which ones we were going to lose, because I knew how many commitments we had. I knew the people that committed, like, you have to call them and be like, have you gone to vote? Yes, I have. Did you vote for us? Yes. Have you gone to vote? No, but I'm going to date. Do you need a ride? Let me help you create a plan. Like, I would know by the people that had gone to vote whether we were going to win that district or not, or that precinct. And it was interesting.
You mentioned I've written about this as well, and I want your take on this as well. I am also a data nerd, right? So I got into this field first with the data
Mhm,
aspect of it in my mind, and like seeing how we could like better target people based on that data.
mhm.
Um, but I've also found that uh, politicians, yes, but you don't really expect politicians to be data nerds. I'm talking about like consultants or campaign workers or local party offices. They themselves don't necessarily know that much about data either. Do you get that impression as well?
I do. I do get that. It is, when I would talk to other staffers in other county parties, like when we would go to like the state convention, um, they didn't, they weren't data driven. It was kind of like the individual campaigns might have been data driven, but the county parties aren't necessarily data driven. And I think
Mhm,
that that is a damn shame,
mhm,
because while politicians only campaign when there's going to be an election, I feel like the party should be campaigning as if there was an election all year round. They need to
100%.
have events. They need to have information sessions. They need to have things going on that aren't just for party insiders and, policy wonks and data nerds like us. They need to relate to everybody. And they don't do that. They only kick things off when it's election season. And that's why you lose people. If you engage them throughout the year outside of the election cycle, then you have somebody, I mean, it's similar to community organizing. So
Mhm.
if you want 30 people somewhere, then you need to target 200 people, 250 people, get confirmations for at least 100 people, and remind them and confirm you have to have at least 4 contacts, and maybe you'll get 30 people there.
Mhm.
And, that's just, and the state party's not really doing anything. I mean, even when the chair of the state party was Gilberto Hinojosa, who is from the Rio Grande Valley, they didn't do
Mhm.
anything. And then we have like elected officials like Henry Cuellar, who is a dino. He's always been a dino. I mean, he was Bush's lapdog, and, that doesn't help. So, um, but I think what happens is that, like, especially in Texas, there is a segment of the Democrats that are considered fiscally conservative. So those elected representatives are more negotiable to work with Republicans. And I'm not saying we shouldn't work with Republicans. I think we should when it's a negotiation, but not just like, roll over and be like, okay, whatever you want.
You touched on something that's been a question I've been struggling with for years now. Even before I got into this, like as a full-time vocation, I guess. Um, Republicans have been at school boards, they've been at city councils, they've
Yeah.
been at all of these little local races, and they've been taken over since. I mean, I guess my frame of reference is Karl Rove. It's probably before that as well, but
Mhm.
whereas Democrats, they only look at my opinion here, they only look at the big shiny object, which happens every 4 years in a presidential election. Um, why, first of all, do you agree with that? And if you do, why are Democrats not in the frame of mind as the Republican Party is, which is everything starts locally? As you mentioned earlier, all politics is local. Why can't the Democratic Party be more of that mindset?
I think that part of the reason is that one of the primary differences, mostly, not with all people, but mostly between the Democrat and the Republican Party, is Democrats tend to go into politics because they want to help people, and Republicans tend to go into politics for power.
Mm,
And if you look at Texas as a framework, the Republicans started by taking over the judiciary.
mhm,
So once they filled as many judgeships as they could, as Republican, then they started, moving into school boards and city elections, even nonpartisan elections. They started taking over, and we've been stuck in this Republican hell here in Texas since Ann Richards. And, I have to say, I love Ann Richards. I met her when, I was a child, but, I think I was like 12. I met Ann Richards, awesome lady. But the problem is that, unfortunately, the only reason I feel that Ann Richards won the first governor's race was because of the comment that her opponent made. And the comment that he made that destroyed his campaign was that rape was like the weather. You need to just lay back and enjoy it. And that killed his campaign. Well, nowadays, that wouldn't do anything. I mean, look at Trump, you know,
yeah.
and, it's disgusting. And there used to be a time when we had values and morals and respect. And it seems that all that has gone by the wayside. Um, on both sides. Um, more on the Republican Party, but because and that's where I feel that the Democrats are stuck because they keep trying to play by the rules. They keep trying to be, respectful and let's talk about our differences. And the Republicans are like, I'm right, you're wrong. I don't give a shit, and that's the difference. The Republicans are going to do what the Republicans want to do, and they're going to steamroll over the Democrats because the Democrats let them, because they're trying to play nice, trying to play by the rules.
So then, how does the Democratic Party counter that, both at the national and at the local level?
I think that the main thing that the Democrats need to do right now is they need to function as a united system where the national party supports the state parties support the local parties, the county parties, and start the way the Republicans did. Start with the local elections, start with the school board, start with city councils, start with county judges, and slowly move up, because you have to establish that base power if you're going to get county power. So you're not going to win a county Democratic election if all your city officials in the county are Republicans. That's just not going to happen.
Mhm.
The only way that would happen is if the entire Republican Party messed up so badly that it wasn't necessarily a vote for Democrats, but a vote against the Republicans. And that's not the way to run a political party. Like, that turns an election into high school. Vote for me because, for student council, because I'm giving out cupcakes. Vote for me because of this. Like, no, I'm not going to vote for you because, you're a jock, or I'm not going to vote for you because you're prom queen. That's what it turns into. It turns into a popularity contest. And,
Hmm.
you're not, it's senseless to assume you're going to have a strong national party when your local parties are in upheaval.
Yep. A
And
hundred percent.
I mean, that's the sad truth. And the reason the Republicans have been so successful, and I actually, I'm rather impressed, is because they started local and they built the foundations. So they could get to the top because they built all the ladders and the bridges that they needed. And they burned ours down and we let them. And we let them by trying to appeal to their their greater side, or they claim to be Christians, but I mean they deport Jesus. So it's mind-boggling at times.
It is mind-boggling, and it's hard for me to understand as well because the Democrats call themselves the party for the people, which I personally believe in. I think we are for the people, but we don't necessarily practice it. We don't um, carry it in our organizing strategies.
Yeah.
Whereas the Republicans, you would think, they're a very top-down, shut up, do what the guy tells you, the guy at the top tells you. But at the local level, they're all over the place, even, in cities you might think are, solidly blue.
Hmm.
Um, so it's been a conundrum for sure. But I want to take it to if we're going to be okay with name calling,
Hmm.
the Republicans do it all the time, and apparently the people vote for them, right?
Yeah.
Um, how, uh, what is the balance between what I believe to be kind of the declining social discourse that we have, and calling Republicans and maybe even, Democratic politicians out? How do we do that? How do we strike that balance?
I think that there is a way to call them out without completely going down to the base level that the Republicans have. Like one of the I really wish he had won, but Beto O'Rourke.
Hmm.
Beto O'Rourke knows what he believes in and he clearly states it. And he may cuss here and there, but he doesn't like downright insult somebody and be like, oh, you're a loser or whatever. And, like the current president. And I think like we need more candidates like him, but good candidates will not win unless the base is shored up.
Mm.
So a great example of this is like in organizing, that if you're going to have a community meeting, so, sometimes you're going to have 30 people there. Sometimes you're going to have 4 people, but you have to consistently have meetings every month because then people will be like, oh yeah, like I couldn't make it last month, but I know it's the third Thursday of the month. So I'm going to go to that meeting.
Hmm.
Um, same location, same time of the month, and you're consistent. So people know when they need you, you're there and you have a consistent base. And what we do is we ignore everybody and don't start having meetings until elections are getting ready to be kicked off. So then each candidate is building from scratch. Whereas if the local Democratic parties had their act together, the winner of the primary could just plug into the base that they already have instead of it being all scattered. And that's what I tell communities that I organize in, is that like you have to have that consistency that people know you're going to be there. You might have 30, you might have 4, you might have 80. You never know. Um
Yeah.
and I think that that's the problem. And another problem is that a lot of times the national officials, when they're planning events in their home districts, they're not looking at, well, what other events are going on, because I mean, if you're having a town hall the same day as the state fair, you know, you might not get any turnout because people are going to be at the state fair. Um, and I think it's just Democrats need to be more strategic. They need to think more. You know, we don't have to necessarily go as low as the Republicans. I think that there's a way for us to do what they do in a more respectful manner without insulting people, without saying that they're not intelligent or anything like that. Because obviously, you know, they are intelligent, at least the elected officials are. Um, they're very effective at duping the Republican citizens because they're like, oh, the Democrats and their Ivy League, blah, blah, blah. But they
Uh,
all went to Yale and Harvard. I mean, if you talk to them long enough, like there's that joke that, you know, how do you know if someone went to Harvard? They've mentioned it 3 times in the first 30 minutes that you're talking. When I was in Harvard, like that is the entire Republican electorate. Harvard, Yale, like, you know, Oxford, they all have these, you know, Ivy League educations, and yet they're shitting on Democrats who have Ivy League education. What I don't get that. And they get elected.
and they get elected,
And
and
they
we take it. We keep taking their punches.
Yeah, why don't we throw it back in their face and say you're picking on me because I went to Harvard or Yale, but you know, you went to Harvard and Yale. You know, like you graduated
Uh,
from Yale, you went to Harvard Law School. Like, come on. And then
Go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, you know, the Republicans pick on people that have gone to like, you know, an HBC or a state college, and you know, they pick on anybody with higher education, and
Yeah,
tell their constituents, well, you see, like we're for the working class, you know. Well, I don't know how you're from the working class if you inherited your wealth,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
More Democrats, I think, have had to fight for the money that they have than Republicans. And
Agreed.
a common joke that we talked about when I worked in the Democratic Party is as soon as a Latino makes money, they become a Republican because they think like, oh, you know, and I've seen that in my family. I've seen people that have done that, that they're like, you know, oh, like I have a good job now, I'm upper middle class, like I'm a Republican now. And it's like, no, like the Democrat Party was there for you before. Why are you ditching us just because you have more zeros in your bank account? Like, you know, I don't know. It just feels like politics used to be a way to run our country, and now it's become a battle of morality. And I don't see how people can back Republicans that are openly racist, that are openly against, you know, like if you just looking at Trump's slogans, Trump is always right. I think that was like Mussolini's. He had a banner at one of his rallies. You know, he's quoting Mussolini, he's quoting Hitler, he's quoting all these fascist dictators. And people are like, oh no, he's not a fascist, he's not a Nazi. Like, historically, his family has a history of racism.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yet people are okay.
Human nature is weird, as I've come to discover these last few years. It almost seems like people are not okay with bullies, but if the other side, if your, solution is a party that doesn't really know what it stands for, then they're just going to go
Yeah,
with the bully party, if that makes sense, right?
yeah.
It's almost like you want to just like shake people and say, I understand we're not like the best when it comes to like standing up for people and standing up for things, but like those guys, the Republicans, are copying what was done in Europe in the 30s and 40s.
Mhm.
So one I guess probably proposal that I've been thinking about is calling out our own side, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of what I write and talk about is actually just that, just calling out the Democratic Party, both at the local, the state, and the national levels. Um, what is your opinion on that? You mentioned, calling out and primarying Chuck Schumer. Eh, would calling out Democratic politicians, people on our side of things, does that help us internally, or does that make it seem like the Democratic Party can't get it together? What's your thoughts on that?
I think that on a large scale, we can call out publicly certain individuals like Schumer when something like that happens, when they vote against our interests. But I think that a lot of what needs to happen is calling people out internally within the party. The Democratic Party needs to restructure and reorganize and become a party that reflects the values that we have. And part of what makes that difficult is that the Republicans are one tent. They're here. The
Mhm.
Democratic Party prides itself as being a large umbrella with a lot of different, factions underneath. And that's great. But we don't have a way to organize the different factions to come to agreements amongst ourselves that we can then move forward with as a party. We've got like 3 different people leading 3 different rebellions, and they all coincide, but they're doing them in different ways, and they're disagreeing amongst themselves. And it's like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? I
Uh-huh.
don't understand. But, part of it is because Democrats are so different. Like we have Tallarico running for Senate here in Texas. He's a theologian, and
Mhm.
he by all rights could be a Republican. Um, and then we have like Bernie Sanders and AOC, and there's lots of shades of gray in the middle, and it's hard to organize something like that. That there are the more conservative Democrats, and then there are the more liberal Democrats. And and it's funny because as liberal as I am, I consider myself a moderate Democrat. And only because I think, I believe in a balanced budget,
Mhm.
but I also believe that we need to take care of our brothers and sisters, you know, um, treat others as you would want to be treated, you know, and it's difficult. And it's difficult because Republicans, and you can kind of tell who Republicans are nowadays because, for example, I was asking somebody very nicely at the dog park here, who was an older white woman, like if she could please like hold her dog so I could go in with my dog. And she was like, "You could have just asked nicely. You didn't have to come at me." And I'm like, oh, okay, so because I'm brown, I'm coming at you.
Mhm.
And that's just like a microcosm of what's going on in our country today, is that anytime a Democrat says anything, the Republicans are like, "Oh, now you're coming at me. Oh, now you all are a leftist organization and you're terrorists." That's ridiculous.
Talk about getting triggered. They're
Yeah,
always the ones that say, we get triggered, but they're the ones that get triggered
yeah,
whenever we want to, as you have in your video frame, put up a flag.
yeah.
Yeah, it's ridiculous for sure. Where then do the local parties play into this whole game? You said, if local parties got their act together, um, what role do they have?
I think that the local parties should be the bridge builders. They should be how the national party feels the pulse of what's going on in a state. So if the local party is having events all year long, they're going to have the pulse of what's going on in the community. They'll know, like, hey, you know, half of our cities have Republican leaders. A fourth of our cities are solidly Democrat, and the other fourth they're like purple cities where they go back and forth, which I believe purple is best. I believe purple is the way to govern, because there's accountability and you have that fluctuation that I think the founders wanted. But if you are solidly red or solidly blue, you're not going to have that fluctuation. You're going to have, whether it's Democrat or Republican, taking advantage of the voters because they're they're betting on those same people voting for them. So the local parties need to be more solidly structured and keep up engagement year round, and that will trickle up. And that's how politics needs to be run, because just like trickle down economics doesn't work, trickle down political structure is not going to work within the Democratic Party. It
Yeah.
works for Republicans because Republicans are they're ride or die. Like, they might not believe what you're saying, but they will go out there in the Klan outfit and wave their Nazi flags and do what they were told to do. Might not agree with it, but the party head said to do it, so they're gonna do it. Democrats, if the party head tells you to do something, you're like, well, yeah, but we might offend this person, we might offend that person. What if we remessage it and package it? So then you get 50 different strategies claiming to do the same thing. Whereas the Republicans are like, these are your marching orders, you follow them or you leave. And
Yeah.
Democrats are too afraid to insult people that that that's why we don't follow marching orders.
Esme, I swear I could go on for hours with you. I wish this was a 4-hour podcast and we both had time because I am such a nerd when it comes to especially the local parties. Obviously, I
Yeah.
worked for one last year, but I was a precinct chair before that as well. Um, just kind of final thoughts here. I think I'm going to steal a quote from you. And I'm going to try to give you credit, but if I forget, you got to forgive me. Purple is best.
Yeah.
You said purple is best, and I think that's a great way of putting it because I do believe, as I think you do as well, that a mix of Democrats and Republicans, especially at the local level, is what's best for our democracy.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be whether it's the local Democratic Party or the state or the national trying to make it so that only Democrats are taking up seats at these positions. It's going to be it's a problem when Republicans do it because then it's only Republicans ruling and they don't make way for opinions from the other side. And it would be a problem if Democrats do it as well. And you could see, I'm not going to call out anybody or any jurisdiction here in Dallas County, but you see it within Dallas County at the local
Yeah.
level. So I'm going to steal that quote for you, and thank you for that. Purple is best. Final thoughts, Esme. Where do you see activism in Dallas in 10 years? Or perhaps where do you see Dallas in 10 years?
I don't know. I mean, I think one thing that has come out of the current presidential administration is that people are taking notice. People are realizing that their voice actually does count. They're realizing, much like with what happened with Jimmy Kimmel, wallets matter. And I think that if Dallas can learn from that, then activism will progress and may even go from being like street protests to, like, one of the things that we do in Downwinders is, we all wear our t-shirts or we all wear the same color and we silently protest at City Hall. And we sit there, like, maybe only one or two people are speaking, but you see the crowd behind them that is supporting them. There is no question who those people are there to support. And I think I can see activism going in that direction in Dallas.
Yeah, good point. Good point. What is the biggest positive that you see in Dallas, and what's the biggest room for improvement in Dallas?
I think that the biggest room for improvement in Dallas is that, and I don't know, maybe it happens in other cities too, but I feel like there's classism going on. And while the Republicans are not, well, the Republicans are overt about it. The Democrats are more like silent shade. And that's obvious when we ask political officials to like work with us in our campaigns and they don't because it might make them look woke. And it's like, I'm sorry, there are people getting cancer in this community. There are people getting COPD. There are people dying. There are people that have died, and you want to play it safe. And I think that if Democrats can stop playing it safe, we'd have a lot more.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. All right. Anything else that you want to share that you couldn't share during this episode?
I think that one thing that we need to remember is that Republicans take things that they accuse Democrats of and repackage it and call it something else. So the Republicans came after us for cancel culture. They've repackaged it and now it's consequence culture. I have been a target of consequence culture. But I'm fortunate that I work for an organization that is like, whatever. Like, I mean, we have an active lawsuit against the current administration. So, you know, me saying thoughts and prayers for Charlie Kirk, didn't phase them. They were kind of like, okay, whatever. Like, but that's what has happened. And I think social media has a large part to do with it.
Let's see the TikTok reactions once I post up this part of the video. Let's see how that works.
They're probably gonna try to cancel me again.
And me. I'm new to this. I don't know what I did here.
You're gonna be like, I just had her on my show. And now people are like trying to get me fired.
Yeah.
But I think that regardless of the consequences, we need to stand up for what we believe in. And we shouldn't be in a position where, people that came from fascist countries or oppressive countries are saying, this is why I immigrated here. And now it's happening here. And, I just feel we're in a sad state. And we need to, I don't know when or how it's going to happen, but we need to start the rebuilding process.
Yes, ma'am. 100% agreed. And we need to start it from the ground up, as you've indicated.
Yeah.
Well, Esme, thank you so much for joining. Folks, this has been Chronicles of a Dallas County Democrat. Please like, share, subscribe. We out.